The quiet power behind the suit, the sunrise was soft that morning, golden rays spilling across the skyline like a warm welcome to the day. In a city known for power lunches, luxury cars, and glass towers that kiss the clouds, a different kind of power stirred quietly inside a brownstone mansion nestled in the quieter, older part of town. It wasn't the kind of place you'd expect a billionaire to live. Not guarded by steel gates or flanked by guards with sunglasses. No fountains, no golden signs screaming importance. Just a clean walkway, a wraparound porch, and ivy growing on brick like it had belonged there for generations. Inside, a man stood alone in his study, staring at an open portfolio resting on the dark mahogany desk. His name was Elijah Brooks, and though the world knew him as the tech visionary who disrupted clean energy markets and became one of the youngest self-made black billionaires in the country, in that quiet morning moment he was simply focused on. Man preparing for a partnership that could shift the industry forever, Elijah wasn't flashy. He didn't crave headlines, nor did he dress for attention. He moved with the grace of someone who had fought for every inch of his success and didn't need to prove anything to anyone. At 42, he was tall, sharply built, with warm brown eyes that carried the weight of wisdom and struggle, the kind of eyes that had seen boardroom betrayals, childhood hunger, and triumphs that tasted better because no one had handed them to him. He reached over to turn off the jazz playing faintly in the background. Miles Davis and opened a sleek, black case containing a crisp cashier's check. $50 million. That was the investment he planned to make today. Not just in any venture but in a long-term sustainable tech initiative, one he had envisioned for years. The initiative required a solid, reputable financial partner to serve as custodian, and he had finally settled on Preston and Halle, one of the city's oldest private banks. A bank known for its heritage, its discretion, and its high-net-worth clientele. The past few months had been a slow courtship. Dozens of calls, formal meetings, video conferences with their executive team. Everyone at the bank had been excessively polite, unusually eager. They knew who Elijah was. They knew what the 50 million meant. They called it a transformational moment for the firm. They promised red carpet service and offered to dedicate an entire team to his portfolio. Elijah wasn't naive. He'd worked with enough institutions to know when flattery was simply a cloak for appetite. But the numbers made sense. The terms were strong. The bank had the credibility he needed, and if everything went as planned, he'd move not just his personal capital but the full weight of Brooks Technologies into their management. Mr. Brooks! A soft voice came from the hallway, interrupting his thoughts. His executive assistant, Marcy, appeared in the doorway holding a tablet and wearing her usual professional calm. She had worked with him for nearly 8 years, and she rarely needed more than a glance to communicate. You have a 10 a.m. appointment at Preston and Halle, they just confirmed again. The email says their Director of Strategic Partnerships will be waiting for you in the executive suite. She handed him the tablet. Elijah scanned the message, smiles, bolded phrases, words like honored and exclusive. The same kind of language that always showed up before the meeting, but disappeared once real interaction began. Do I have anything after the bank? Elijah asked without looking up. Marcy nodded. Lunch with the mayor at 12:30 to discuss the Southside Youth Center. And your keynote at the Tech Futures Summit at 3 o'clock. They're setting up the green room now. He gave a small smile. Good, let's keep it on track. I'll drive myself today. Are you taking the Bentley? She asked, already moving toward the valet cabinet. Elijah paused. No, the model. Marcy raised an eyebrow. It was a rare move for him. The Bentley was the kind of car that got people's attention, the kind of car banks expected their whales to arrive in. But the Tesla was subtle, clean, quiet. And that was the mood today. By 9:15 a.m. Elijah was on the road, his Tesla gliding through traffic with smooth autonomy. He wore a navy jacket, no tie, and soft charcoal slacks. Expensive, yes, but in a way that didn't scream it. He drove, with one hand on the wheel and one eye on the skyline. Preston and Hale's glass tower stood like a monument in the center of the financial district, 35 stories of old money prestige. No logos, no advertisements. Just a discreet golden P&H plaque beside the revolving door. Tasteful, confident, exclusive. At 9:45 sharp, he pulled into the underground garage and parked himself. No valet, no entourage, no security team. Elijah never liked making a show of presence. His confidence came from what he built, not how many people followed him. He adjusted his collar in the rearview mirror, picked up the black leather briefcase, and walked calmly toward the elevators. As he entered the lobby of Preston and Halle, he noticed it was hushed and bathed in natural light. The marble floors gleamed. Like mirrors, a pianist played softly in the corner. Several clients, mostly white, mostly older, sat in leather chairs sipping espresso. Everyone looked like they belonged on a Forbes cover. Elijah approached the reception desk. The woman behind. It was young, stylish, and smiling, until she saw him. Her smile faltered, not noticeably, but enough. He saw the flash of it, the slight tightening of her jaw, the eyes that flicked quickly from his face to his shoes to his hands before returning to professional mode. "Good morning," he said, calmly. "I have a 10 a.m. appointment with the Director of Strategic Partnerships, Elijah Brooks." The receptionist blinked and seemed to catch herself. "Do you have confirmation?" she asked, fingers hesitating over the keyboard. Elijah's face didn't move, but inside he sighed. He had watched 3 people walk in before him. None of them asked for confirmation. She didn't even touch the keyboard when a white man in a bright blue blazer checked in just moments ago. Elijah opened his phone, showed her the email pre-approved, confirmed, VIP flagged in their system. She nodded, forcing a smile. "Please take a seat, Mr. Brooks. Someone will be with you shortly." He looked past her to the executive suite doors, closed, the same doors that had opened instantly when another client arrived earlier. "Thank you," he said, then turned and sat near the window, placing his briefcase gently beside him. 10 minutes passed. Then 15. Elijah watched. The banker team walked in and out of the executive rooms, escorting clients with silver briefcases and Louis Vuitton portfolios. One white woman was offered tea and snacks by a junior associate before being led to the back. At 10:12, Elijah's appointment time had come and gone. The pianist changed songs. A man in a gray suit with a Rolex was called in. Elijah's name was never spoken. 20-5 minutes later, a sharply dressed man in a brown suit walked up to the receptionist. Elijah heard the words Platinum Investment Trust and walk-in, and less than a minute later, that man was being escorted into the back. He wasn't on any list. He didn't show any ID, but he was white, confident, and loud. And that seemed to be enough. Elijah's jaw tightened, but he remained still. He checked his phone, no updates, no messages. His assistant hadn't heard anything either. Finally, at 10:30, he rose and returned to the desk. "Excuse me," he said, politely but firmly. "I was scheduled to meet with your strategic director at 10. I'm still waiting. I just saw another client escorted in. Is there a delay I should be aware of?" The receptionist gave a bland smile. "I'm sorry, Mr. Brooks, our executive team is handling higher priority clients this morning. We'll let you know when someone becomes available." The words hit like a cold slap. Higher priority. A man coming in with no appointment had been ushered in. Elijah, who held a $50 million investment check in his briefcase, was told to wait. He nodded once, slowly, his expression unreadable. "Very well," he said quietly, and returned to his seat. But something shifted inside him, a stillness, not anger, not ego. Just clarity. He looked around the lobby and saw the faces of the employees. Most were avoiding eye contact. But one man, young, Latino, likely in his late 20s, was watching. Their eyes met for just a moment. The younger man looked apologetic, embarrassed even, then quickly looked away. 10:42 a.m. the elevator chimed, and the walk-in client emerged from the back, laughing and shaking hands with the investment director. "We'll talk more over lunch," the man boomed. The director patted him on the back, then turned and noticed Elijah sitting by the window. For a moment their eyes met. But instead of approaching, the director leaned in to whisper something to the receptionist. She nodded. Elijah saw it. He watched everything dot at 10:47. The receptionist finally walked over, stiffly holding a clipboard. "Mr. Brooks? Mr. Granger will see you now in conference room 3, not the executive suite, not the platinum room. Conference room 3? A meeting room near the copy machine." Elijah stood, collected his briefcase, and walked past her without a word. As he did, he noticed the walk-in client glance back at him. The man gave a smirk, condescending, dismissive. Like he had seen this show before. Elijah entered conference room 3 and sat at the end of the table. The walls were thin, the furniture was cheap. A far cry from the marble conference rooms he had been promised. The meeting was about to begin, but something told Elijah that the real meeting had already happened. And he hadn't been invited, and in 5 more minutes, everything would change. Dismissed and disrespected, Elijah sat quietly in conference room 3, his back straight, hands folded, the briefcase with the $50 million check resting on the table beside him. The room was sterile, barely lit by the single ceiling light overhead. The table had visible scratches, and the chairs felt like they belonged in a forgotten staff break room, not a space meant for high-net-worth clients. No welcome tray, no bottled water, no printed packet of brochures like they had prepared during his earlier visits. Only silence, and the heavy sense that this wasn't where he was supposed to be. He looked at the frosted glass wall and could faintly see the movement. On the other side, the shadows of executives laughing, talking, guiding other clients through polished hallways. His name was never called. No one peeked in. No one acknowledged the fact that he had waited over 45 minutes despite a scheduled, confirmed appointment for the bank's Platinum Investment Trust. He had been promised a suite. What he got was a closet with chairs. He tapped the table lightly, once, then again, then opened the portfolio on his lap. Everything was in perfect order: cash flow forecasts, risk exposure analysis, an entire expansion model built on 5 years of sustainable growth. Elijah didn't need this bank, but he had chosen it carefully, believing that a historic, respected institution like Preston and Halle would see the value not just in the capital, but in the vision he brought. The partnership would have been a legacy move. And yet here he sat, overlooked, dismissed, and invisible in a space that only weeks ago had begged to host him. The door opened abruptly, and a man in his mid-50s stepped in, adjusting his tie with the air of someone who believed every room was already his. His badge read Douglas Granger, VP of Institutional Investments. He didn't greet Elijah. He didn't extend a hand. He simply sat down across from him with a folder and placed it on the table without even looking at him directly. "I'm told you're interested in the Platinum Trust," Granger said, his tone flat, impersonal, and clinical. Elijah offered a nod, choosing to stay composed. "I already submitted the full application through your executive team," Elijah replied. "This meeting was supposed to be for closing and account structuring." Granger finally looked up, his expression skeptical. "That may have been the expectation, Mr. Brooks," he said, flipping open the folder. "But we've had a lot of interest in the trust this week, serious interest. One of our longtime clients came in this morning. Based on his existing holdings and historical relationship with the bank, it's likely we'll proceed with him. The remaining allocation in the trust is limited." The insult landed like a slap, but Elijah's face didn't change. "That longtime client came in without an appointment," he said evenly. "I watched him enter the building. And I watched him be escorted into the VIP suite less than 2 minutes later. I've been here since 9:45 with a scheduled appointment and pre-cleared investment. What exactly has changed in the last 48 hours since your team confirmed my closing?" Granger exhaled, as if bothered by the formality of having to explain himself. "We appreciate your interest," he said with a condescending smile. "But clients like Mr. Callahan—" "Elijah Brooks," Elijah interrupted, correcting him firmly. "Let's not pretend you don't know my name. You've had my profile on your desk for a month." A tense silence followed. Granger leaned back in his chair, narrowed his eyes slightly. "Well, Mr. Brooks," he said, placing emphasis on the name as if mocking the correction. Preston and Halle has always reserved the right to adjust investment selections based on alignment with institutional values. Sometimes it's not just about the numbers. It's about the relationship, the legacy, the kind of partnership we're building. He closed the folder slowly, deliberately. I'm not sure this bank is the right fit for you. You might find our community investment program more suitable. They handle smaller accounts and startups. Elijah stared at him in silence. Not out of shock, he had seen this play out before, though not often with such blatant disrespect, but out of the deep, calculating realization that what he had suspected was now confirmed. Granger didn't see him as a real client. He saw him as a fluke, a problem. An outsider in a room meant for old money and old power. His skin tone, despite the wealth behind it, made him an anomaly to be tolerated. Not respected, he reached for his briefcase. Calmly, without a word, he placed it on the table, unlocked it, and withdrew a sealed white envelope. Then he laid it down between them. That, Elijah said, voice still calm and razor-sharp, is a cashier's check, drawn from Brooks Holdings. It's for $50 million. That check was intended for Preston and Halle this morning for this trust, and for a long-term strategic relationship that would have brought more than just capital into this institution. Granger looked at the envelope, then at Elijah. He didn't move, didn't touch it, just sneered slightly and leaned back. Is that supposed to impress me? No, Elijah said. It's supposed to remind you that you made the wrong decision. He reached down, took the envelope again, and in one clean motion, tore it in half down the center. The sound was louder than expected in the stillness of the room. Then he tore it again. The pieces fluttered down onto the table like confetti at a funeral. Granger blinked, suddenly unsure. Is this a threat? He asked. No, Elijah said, standing slowly and picking up his briefcase. It's a courtesy. Most people don't get to see what $50 million looks like right before they lose it. He turned to the door. Granger stood abruptly, flustered. Sir, you can't just... But Elijah didn't stop. As he opened the door, he found himself face to face with Brendan Callahan, the white walking client who had been ushered into the executive suite less than 30 minutes ago. The man was laughing, a half-finished espresso in his hand, followed by a team of bankers glowing with attention. He paused mid-laugh when he saw Elijah, and the grin on his face turned into a smug, lingering smirk. Something wrong, buddy? Brandon asked. Still sipping from the tiny cup, Elijah said nothing. Just looked at him, at the staff behind him, at the room that was supposed to be his, and walked past. The receptionist stood at her desk, trying not to make eye contact. Security watched quietly from the corner. Clients turned their heads. As he passed, the whole lobby was a slow-motion movie now. One man, walking out of a bank that had tried to minimize him while carrying the kind of power they didn't even recognize. But just before he reached the exit, Elijah paused. Slowly, he reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, and dialed a number. A voice answered immediately. Marcy, he said calmly, cancel the investment with Preston and Halle. They made their decision. There was a beat of silence. Then, he added, louder this time, also call Alan Prescott at City First Trust. Tell him I'm moving forward with them instead. Let's initiate the wire for the full 50. He ended the call and looked around once more. Dozens of eyes watched him, some nervous, some curious. A few ashamed, but none of that mattered now. The choice had been made. A lesson was unfolding. And Preston and Hale, so proud, so sure, was about to learn what it meant to dismiss the very client they had once chased with emails, brochures, and promises. 5 minutes later, the earthquake would begin. The phone call that shook the bank, the marble floor, echoed with every step Elijah Brooks took as he left the heart of Preston and Halle. Briefcase in hand, his stride steady but silent. He didn't rush, he didn't look back. There was no need. His presence had already shaken the room. But what no one inside that bank knew, at least not yet, was that the real earthquake had just begun, and its shockwaves were about to tear through every level of the institution like a quiet storm turned deadly. Elijah reached the outer glass doors, paused for just a moment beneath the golden plaque that read, Established 1904. and turned his gaze back toward the lobby. For a moment, he didn't see luxury or legacy. He saw a house built on illusion. And like any house built on a cracked foundation, it was only a matter of time before it collapsed. Outside, the morning sun poured through the buildings like truth. Elijah tapped a single contact on his phone. Alan Prescott, CEO, City First Trust. The line clicked once. Alan answered before the second ring. Elijah? They made their choice, Elijah said, his voice calm, almost casual. It wasn't me. There was a pause on the other end, then Alan's voice, sharper now. Are you serious? Elijah stopped beside his car and opened the door. They gave my room to someone else, a walk-in. I was told I'd be more suited for their small business department. After I waited nearly an hour for a confirmed appointment. Alan didn't speak for a moment, but Elijah could hear his mind. Turning gears, City First had been Elijah's second option. A newer institution, less historic, less flashy, but hungry and progressive, built by a diverse group of founders who wanted to change how finance operated. They didn't beg for Elijah's business, but they respected it. And that mattered more now than ever. I'll have the transfer team ready in 15 minutes, Alan said, steel in his voice now. You still moving all 50? Every penny, Elijah replied. And let your PR team know, this is about more than money. It's about partnership. I'll make the announcement at the summit this afternoon. When the call ended, Elijah didn't drive off immediately. He sat in the Tesla's driver's seat, watching the tall glass building across the street. It was still waking up, unaware that something had shifted beneath its feet. Inside, people were still sipping cappuccinos, still shaking hands, still thinking they were in control. But behind the veil of suits and smiles, Elijah knew the truth. Power didn't always look like old money or a familiar name. Sometimes, power walked in wearing quiet confidence and left without a word and took everything with it. Back inside the bank, the atmosphere remained unchanged, at least on the surface. Clients moved in and out. Advisors whispered behind desks. The reception desk hummed with fake smiles. But something had begun to feel off. A slow discomfort crept through the building like fog. One junior employee, in particular Jared Fields, 28, financial associate, couldn't shake the unease. He had been watching the Elijah Brooks situation unfold from a nearby desk, frozen in his seat. At first, he had tried to tell himself it wasn't what it looked like. Maybe it was a scheduling issue. Maybe the receptionist had made a mistake. But when he saw Mr. Granger enter the conference room and later saw Elijah leave without even a handshake, Jared felt sick to his stomach. He had recognized Elijah immediately. Jared had studied at Stanford. He'd written a research paper on sustainable tech and had included Brooks Technologies as one of his case studies. He knew the company's worth. He knew Elijah's impact. And he knew absolutely that the man walking out had just carried more value in his briefcase than the entire floor they worked on. Jared opened the internal messaging system on his desktop, hovered his fingers over the keys, then typed a message to his supervisor. Do you know we just turned away Elijah Brooks? He hit send, unsure what kind of response he would get. None came. Meanwhile, upstairs on the top floor, inside the mahogany-paneled office of Elliot Cartwright, the bank president of Preston and Halle, the morning had begun like any other. Cartwright was in a video call with a European investor, sipping from a gold-rimmed espresso cup. The office smelled of old cigars and imported wood polish. He hadn't yet heard what was unfolding 3 floors below. Not yet, but that silence was about to be broken. In the corner of his desk, Cartwright's phone buzzed, not his work line, not his mobile. The red line, the direct line linked only to the board's legal division and his private counsel. He excused himself from the call and picked it up. This is Miranda with legal. We just got a notification from City First Trust. They're issuing a public statement in 30 minutes. It references a canceled investment with Preston and Halle, apparently. A $50 million deal that was redirected to them after being rejected by us. You know anything about this? Elliot froze. 50 million? He repeated, yes. Miranda said, and the name attached to the transfer is Elijah Brooks. Everything inside Cartwright went still. He slowly lowered the espresso cup to his desk, his hand slightly trembling now. The name wasn't just familiar, it was legendary. Elijah Brooks wasn't just another wealthy investor. He was a symbol of modern innovation. His influence extended into politics, philanthropy, and corporate tech. A single endorsement from him could shift investor interest, elevate a brand, or crash a competitor. And Preston and Halle had just turned him away? Cartwright stood, walked to the window, looked down at the street below where Elijah's Tesla was just pulling out of the garage. Then he slammed the phone down and buzzed his executive assistant. "Get Douglas Granger in here right now," he barked, "and find out who authorized the rejection of Elijah Brooks." But it was already too late. 30 minutes later, City First Trust issued a press release across major financial networks and business wires. It was short, elegant, and devastating. City First Trust is proud to announce a strategic partnership with Brooks Technologies, totaling an initial investment of $50 million. This collaboration represents our commitment to innovation, diversity, and forward-thinking finance. We thank Mr. Elijah Brooks for his trust in our institution. The press picked it up instantly. Business channels ran the headline within the hour. Elijah's name trended on social media before noon. Reporters began digging. And then came the moment that no one at Preston and Halle could have stopped. Video footage, a man in the bank lobby client. Maybe employee had filmed the entire interaction. Not just Elijah waiting, not just the other man being escorted in, but the moment Elijah stood, tore the check and said, "Most people don't get to see what $50 million looks like before they lose it." The video spread like wildfire, reposted by business leaders, influencers, and civil rights advocates. Hashtags like #WeSeeYou and #banking while black trended within hours. The footage wasn't angry, it wasn't violent, but it was powerful because Elijah didn't raise his voice, he didn't shout, he didn't fight, he just walked away. And let the silence speak volumes. Inside Preston and Halle, phones began to ring. Accounts began to close. Emails from longtime clients poured in, considering other options. "We don't tolerate discrimination. Explain this immediately." Douglas Granger was summoned to the boardroom. He tried to deny it. Tried to frame it as a misunderstanding. He used words like policy and process and portfolio alignment. But no one was listening anymore. He had torn up Elijah Brooks' file. He had denied his access. He had made a decision that would cost the institution everything. And for the first time in his career, Granger looked like a man who realized he had just destroyed his own future. But Elijah? Elijah wasn't looking back. By 2 p.m., he had arrived at the Tech Futures Summit, standing on a stage surrounded by innovators, investors, and city leaders. Cameras flashed. Reporters gathered. And Elijah, standing under the warm glow of stage lights, took the podium with the same calm presence he had carried into that cold bank lobby just hours earlier. "I was reminded today," he said into the microphone, "that wealth might open doors, but character decides which ones stay. Open, I took my investment somewhere that valued not just my capital, but my humanity. That's the kind of future we need to build." The crowd erupted. The live stream surged past 1 million viewers. Preston and Hale's PR team scrambled to respond, but there was no stopping it now. The phone call Elijah made wasn't just about money. It was about power, about respect, about what happens when the quietest man in the room decides he's had enough and walks out. With everything exposed in front of everyone, the tremors started small. A few emails here, a couple of social media posts there. Whispers in boardrooms, glances in private investor chat groups. But by mid-afternoon, the full impact of what had happened inside Preston and Halle was impossible to contain. What had begun as a quiet dismissal of a black CEO in a glass-walled bank lobby had erupted into a digital storm, raging louder than anything the firm had seen in its 120-year history. For all its marble floors and golden pens and legacy clients, the bank had just made one fatal mistake. It believed no one was watching, but the world was watching now. And it had receipts. By the time the video of Elijah Brooks tearing the $50 Million check had reached its 10th million view. Major business outlets began requesting statements. First, it was online magazines, blogs, Twitter threads. Then it was financial TV networks. By 4 p.m., a full segment aired on Business Now, titled, "Did this bank just reject a $50 million investment because of race?" The screen split in half on. One side, a still image of Elijah standing in the bank lobby, composed and proud, his briefcase beside him. On the other side, blurry security footage captured from inside the bank, a white man with slicked back hair, wearing a flashy watch, being ushered into the VIP conference suite with handshakes and smiles. The contrast told the whole story, no narration was needed. But the anchors gave one anyway, outlining Elijah's history, his accomplishments, his generosity, his quiet leadership. They pointed out that Preston and Halle had not responded to multiple requests for comment. Inside the bank's downtown headquarters, chaos was quietly building. The lobby that had once hummed with the smooth rhythm of elite clients and polished shoes now felt thick with tension. Employees whispered in corners. Senior managers huddled in offices, locking doors, making urgent calls. A hastily assembled PR team was working from an upstairs suite, trying to draft a public apology that wouldn't sound like an admission of guilt. But even they knew it's too late. Meanwhile, Elijah hadn't spoken since his speech at the summit. He had flown. Beneath the noise, ignored every call from media outlets, declined interviews. Instead, he returned to his private workspace, a clean, sunlit corner of his innovation lab in the south end of the city. The walls were lined with whiteboards filled with sketches and ideas. There were no trophies, no awards, no headlines framed in glass. Just vision, progress, action. His assistant, Marcy, entered the room quietly, holding a stack of printed emails. "This one is from Congresswoman Young's office," she said. "They want to meet about launching a financial accountability task force." Inspired by what happened today, Elijah looked up. "They're serious. They already have 3 co-sponsors and a draft proposal," Marcy said. This has become bigger than just you." He leaned back in his chair, not to bask in attention, but to reflect. He hadn't planned for any of this. All he wanted was to be treated like any other investor. Nothing more, nothing less. But instead, the moment he walked into that lobby, assumptions had walked in with him. He had been reduced to a stereotype in a suit. That's what hurt the most, not the rejection, not even the check, but the idea that his worth was decided by skin before they ever opened the file. And now? Now, the weight of that moment had shifted into something none of them had expected. Back at Preston and Halle, the unraveling continued. Clients began withdrawing funds quietly at first. By 6 p.m., over $400 million in account closures had been initiated. Internal emails from institutional clients read cold and final. "We will be transferring all assets by end of day Friday. No further communication required." Some included screenshots of the viral video as justification. That night, while the city lights sparkled like jewels in the skyline, a boardroom meeting was held on the 30th floor of Preston and Halle. Every partner was present. Elliot Cartwright, the president, looked like he had aged a decade in a single day. His hair was disheveled. His tie hung loose around his neck. He stood at the head of the long walnut table, a large screen behind him displaying financial damage. Graphs, every chart showed a red arrow pointing down. "How did this happen?" One board member demanded. "Where was our due diligence?" asked another. "The footage is everywhere." "Clients are pulling out. Our brand is being destroyed. You let a man like Elijah Brooks walk out of this building and into the arms of our competitor?" All eyes turned to Douglas Granger, who sat pale and hunched near the middle of the table. His voice, which once commanded entire investment teams, now trembled slightly. "I didn't know it was him at first," he muttered. "That's the problem," another executive snapped. "You didn't know because you didn't look, you didn't ask? You assumed?" There was silence. Cartwright stepped forward, voice cold. "Effective immediately, Douglas Granger is suspended pending full investigation. And if this board determines he acted with bias or breached fiduciary duty, we will be making that termination public." Granger's shoulders sank. It was over. He knew it, but the night wasn't done. Just as the meeting began to close, the chief compliance officer entered the room, pale and wide-eyed. "Sir," he said to Cartwright, "we have a problem." "Another problem." He handed Cartwright a printed transcript. "We've been contacted by regulators. They're asking for clarification on all recent rejections of minority applicants to our high-value programs. Someone filed an anonymous report linking today's incident with two others in the past year. We're being audited." Silence. The air went dead. The boardroom, once filled with the scent of imported cologne and aged scotch, now stank of fear. But far away from the glass towers and boardroom drama, Elijah Brooks was already planning his next move. Not revenge, not lawsuits, something bigger. He met that night with his executive team at Brooks Technologies, sitting around a reclaimed oak table in his office that used to be a storage room when he started the company 10 years earlier. He stood at the whiteboard, writing a phrase in bold black letters: Financial Equality Initiative. "I don't want this to be about me," he said, turning to his team. "What happened today happens to people every day. People who don't have cameras or money or a name." His team listened closely. "We're creating an initiative," he continued. "A task force that will audit banks, investment firms, and institutions, document how people are treated based on how they look, where they're from, or how much money they're assumed to have. We'll publish the reports. We'll create a scorecard, and we'll invite those banks to improve or be held accountable." The room filled with quiet applause, not out of celebration, but out of purpose. Real, unshakable purpose. By morning, the headlines had shifted again. Elijah Brooks launches $10 million financial justice fund following viral bank incident. City First sees $1.2 billion in new deposits following Brooks partnership. Preston and Halle suffers reputation collapse, regulators open investigation. And across the country, millions of young entrepreneurs of color, college students, and professionals watch the story unfold not just as spectators but as believers. Believers that maybe the system was finally being challenged not with anger, but with undeniable proof, quiet dignity, and relentless strategy. Because when Elijah walked out of that bank, he didn't just carry his briefcase, he carried a movement. The world is watching now. It had been exactly 1 week since Elijah Brooks had walked out of Preston and Halle with a torn $50 million check in his hand and his dignity still untouched. But the world had not moved on. In fact, the world had only just begun to pay attention. What started as a silent rejection of a powerful black CEO in an old white banking institution had turned into an unstoppable wave, a tidal shift of reckoning that no press team, no apology letter, and no crisis control meeting could contain. The story had transcended industry boundaries and entered the global conversation. News outlets from London to Lagos, from New York to Nairobi, now featured the name Elijah Brooks not just as a business leader, but as a symbol. It wasn't just about finance anymore. It was about how silent prejudice dressed in luxury and protocol could still humiliate, still reduce, still reject, even when the person walking through the door was worth more than the institution itself. And yet, the thing that struck people most wasn't the humiliation Elijah endured, it was how he responded, without rage, without revenge, without loud threats. He simply walked out, and in doing so took something far greater than his investment. He took their illusion of control. Across the digital sphere, the video of Elijah calmly tearing the check had become iconic. Artists recreated in sketches, animations, even graffiti. Journalists wrote op-eds titled, "The Man Who Made $50. Millions speak louder than hate." When integrity walked out of the lobby, what Preston and Halle lost wasn't money, it was their future. And behind the headlines, real consequences began to solidify. Preston and Hale's stock continued to nosedive, now down over 41% from the day before Elijah's video went viral. The firm lost 4 major corporate accounts, all citing the incident as the reason. The board issued a public statement promising a full review of institutional practices and a renewed commitment to inclusion, but no one was buying it. Especially not Elijah, who had already moved on, though his presence lingered in every boardroom and back office meeting like a haunting reminder of what silence could cost. Meanwhile, Elijah's Financial Equality Initiative, announced just days earlier, was already shifting the landscape. It had received over 12,000 applications from clients, whistleblowers, and bank employees across the country, sharing experiences of being dismissed, ignored, or profiled. Stories poured in, some quiet, some shocking, but all echoing the same truth. Discrimination wasn't always loud. Sometimes it was in the tone of a voice. The way someone looked you up and down, the door they didn't open, the coffee they didn't offer. In response, 3 major banks reached out to Elijah's team voluntarily, asking to be audited by the initiative before the first report was published. They weren't doing it out of guilt. They were doing it out of fear of becoming the next Preston and Halle, and while the financial world braced for the first official audit release, City First trusts the institution that had welcomed Elijah. When Preston and Halle closed its doors, was thriving. The bank reported a record-breaking influx of new accounts, $1.6 billion in deposits in just 5 days. Their social media pages were flooded with messages like, "Moved my account to City First," after seeing how they stood by Elijah Brooks. Finally, a bank that understands people over profiles. Supporting City First because they supported integrity. On the rooftop of the City First headquarters, a press event was held that week to announce a new sustainability partnership with Brooks Technologies. Elijah stood beside Alan Prescott, the CEO of City First, both of them surrounded by a diverse crowd of reporters and supporters. The backdrop wasn't a golden lobby or a chandelier-lit boardroom. It was a skyline filled with cranes, solar panels, and wind turbine symbols of the future Elijah had always been building toward. In his speech, Elijah kept it short, simple, honest. "There's something sacred about being believed in," he said, his voice steady and clear. "Not because you're famous, not because you're wealthy, but simply because you walked in the door with something to offer. City First didn't just take my money, they took a stand. And now we're building something together that'll outlive all of us." The applause was thunderous, but Elijah didn't linger for cameras. Instead, he returned to his office and focused on something far more meaningful than press: mentoring. Because even as the world applauded, Elijah knew there were thousands of young professionals, especially Black and brown entrepreneurs, watching him closely, not just for what he said, but for what he would do next. That afternoon, he invited 6 of them, 3 men, 3 women, all under 30, into his downtown conference space. They were part of the first Brooks Venture Fellowship, a program he launched quietly after the Preston and Halle incident. All 6 had powerful startup ideas. All had been denied funding by traditional institutions. One had been told she was too young and too brown to be taken seriously. Another had been asked during a pitch meeting if he could dress more professionally next time. They carried wounds. But they also carried fire. Elijah stood before them, not as a savior, but as someone who understood. "You don't owe anyone your silence," he told them. "You owe yourself the space to build. And you don't need a golden pen or a marble floor to validate your dreams. All you need is a door that opens without judgment. This," he said, gesturing around, "the room is that door?" And he backed those words with capital. Each fellow received a 6-figure startup grant. No equity taken, just belief given. At the same time, back at Preston and Halle, the nightmare was deepening. Internal investigations revealed not just one incident of discrimination, but a pattern. One email thread between 2 mid-level managers was leaked, showing racially coded language used to assess potential clients. Another showed an executive instructing staff to prioritize legacy clients over walk-ins with no family history. The evidence piled up. So did the consequences. On the following Monday, Elliot Cartwright, the bank's president, officially resigned under pressure from the board and external regulators. A new interim CEO was appointed, a Latina financial expert named Isabel Mendez, who had spent the last 10 years advocating for banking reform and racial equity. Her appointment was a step toward redemption, but the road ahead would be long. and public trust would be harder to rebuild than financial portfolios. Still, amidst the fallout, a sense of change lingered in the air. Because Elijah's story wasn't just about what he lost, it was about what was finally being seen. A man walked into a bank with $50 million and was treated like he didn't belong. But instead of making a scene, he made a statement. And in doing so, he held up a mirror to an entire industry, a mirror that couldn't be ignored anymore. Justice, change, and a new beginning. 6 weeks had passed since the day Elijah Brooks walked out of Preston and Halle with nothing in his hands but everything in his power. And in that short window of time, the entire financial world had changed. Not just in policy or press, but in how people looked at institutions that once claimed to be elite. Investors, entrepreneurs, everyday account holders, they were no longer silent, no longer patient with systems that ignored them, questioned them, or made them feel smaller because of their skin color or the neighborhood they came from. What Elijah did that morning hadn't just lit a fire under a failing banking structure. It had turned quiet humiliation into global conversation. The storm that followed was documented in every major paper: the collapse of Preston and Hales, brand reputation, the resignation of its president, the exposure of racist internal emails, the withdrawal of more than $3.4 billion in assets within a month. But while those headlines made noise, what truly mattered, the part Elijah focused on, was the impact that couldn't be measured in dollars. In the time since, his financial equality initiative had grown into a full-fledged nonprofit watchdog organization equipped with legal experts, analysts, and financial accessibility advocates. Their mission wasn't to punish banks. It was to measure them, audit them, expose them, and ultimately to give the public a scorecard, one that highlighted how institutions treated people before the balance sheet was ever opened. And for the first time in modern banking history, consumers started choosing where to keep their money based not on interest rates or app design, but on values. On a bright Monday morning, as spring air moved through the city like a whisper of renewal, Elijah stood once again at the entrance of Preston and Halle. This time he wasn't alone. Standing beside him were 6 young entrepreneurs, his fellows. Black, brown, white, Asian, Muslim, queer, neurodiverse. Every one of them had been denied something before. A loan, a pitch meeting, a moment of being taken seriously. But today, they stood tall in tailored suits and confident smiles. Not because of what they wore, but because of who walked beside them. The bank lobby looked different now. Subtle changes, more diverse staff at the front desk, a new code of conduct poster near the elevators, digital monitors displaying customer wait times, instead of the unspoken social hierarchy that used to dictate who got seen and who got ignored. Still, beneath the polish, the building carried a ghost. The memory of what happened in this very place hadn't faded. It was now part of the bank's DNA. And that was the point. As Elijah and his group walked in, the receptionist stood up quickly, eyes wide with recognition. "Mr. Brooks," she said, voice shaking slightly, "welcome back. We've been expecting you." Elijah nodded once. "We're here to meet with the new leadership. We won't be long." They were led not into the main floor, but to a newly constructed community innovation wing, a section of the building funded ironically by emergency restructuring grants issued after the bank's losses. Waiting inside was Isabel Mendez, the new CEO. She had taken over the position just 3 weeks prior, but was already earning a quiet respect from regulators and reform advocates. She didn't pretend to be perfect, but she made it clear this bank was no longer going to hide behind its name. "Mr. Brooks," she said, extending her hand with sincerity, "I want to thank you for what you exposed, for what you endured, and for not choosing destruction when destruction would have been easy." Elijah took her hand. "I didn't come back here to forgive. I came back to make sure the next person doesn't have to fight the same way." Isabel gestured to the 6 fellows behind him. "And who are these bright minds?" "These," Elijah said, "are the future of everything you claim to protect." The meeting that followed wasn't ceremonial. It was real. Elijah's team presented ideas for a partnership pilot, a program where rising entrepreneurs could get access to banking services without needing legacy wealth, perfect credit, or skin privilege. They discussed a transparency dashboard, public scoring, and quarterly audits that the bank would agree to undergo voluntarily. It wasn't about handouts, it was about access. And accountability. Isabel listened. Her team took notes. And by the end of the hour, they signed a memorandum of understanding, a document that would eventually be called the Brooks Protocol. It was a first-of-its-kind agreement between a watchdog nonprofit and a legacy banking institution. And it all started with one torn check. After the meeting, Elijah and his group toured the bank one last time. They passed through the very space where he once sat waiting, ignored, judged, and dismissed. Now, the space had a small plaque mounted beside the wall, beneath a framed quote. It read, "True wealth is not measured by account balance, but by who you are willing to value." Even when no one is watching, Elijah Brooks, he stared at it quietly for a moment. Then one of his fellows, a 24-year-old woman named Rhea, stepped beside him. "You could have burned them to the ground," she said. "Why didn't you?" Elijah turned to her with a calm smile. "Because burning down a broken house only clears the land. But rebuilding it the right way, that gives others a home." The group left the bank together, stepping back into a city that had changed its tone, not because of guilt, not even because of exposure, but because someone had stood up without raising his voice. Because a man who could have shattered a system chose instead to remake it with dignity, patience, and precision. That evening, Elijah returned home, not to a press event or a gala, but to his quiet brownstone, the same home he'd lived in long before the world knew his name. He poured himself a cup of tea, sat by the window, and listened to the jazz playing faintly through the speakers. His phone buzzed with messages of congratulations, news alerts, political requests. He ignored them all. Instead, he opened a blank notebook, wrote the word legacy across the top, and underneath it, began sketching plans for a community lending project in the neighborhoods that most banks still avoided, because he knew the battle wasn't over, and while the world would remember the man who walked out of the bank and cost them $50 million, what mattered most, what no one could put a price on, was the world he chose to walk into next.